I'm Jack Phillips. I'm chair of the ROI Institute. And basically, we help people see the value of what they do. We can do it for them. We can do it with them, or we can teach them to do it. So we prefer teaching people how to measure their success, all the way to ROI. So we provide consulting, workshops, publications, research, tools, templates, all aimed at showing the value of what you do.
Yeah, and this is something I think for us in our LCD community has been so important, because we want to make sure that we make a difference on the job, right? And I think that's something that we definitely have in common between both of our methodologies and models is how do we make an impact on the job and show an impact on the business? And we're all about let's have multiple different assets so we can have that confidence that we're making an impact on the job versus cramming everything into a single class or course and trying to make that same difference. So as I was sharing, we had a bunch of follow-up questions for you after our talk. And one of the first ones, and this is one we struggle with a lot too, is we help people modernize learning and their stakeholders still expect them to do business as usual. So we've run into this with measures as well, where someone will be measuring usage and reaction and kind of the butts and seats measures. And they're telling me, well, my stakeholders want to see those numbers. They're not really asking us to measure ROI. We want to measure it so we can prove our worth and show that, but they're not asking for it. They just still want to know butts and seats. So I was just curious if you've come across that in your experience and how you might influence stakeholders to expect something different from L&D.
Yes. All right. First, the person you're dealing with is probably someone who's what we call an interim client, and not the ultimate client. The ultimate client is the person who's paying for the program, that gives the budget for the program, that's giving you funding. That person wants to see the impact. They want to see the ROI. But the person you're dealing with is someone who kind of shares the ownership of that program with you. And there's some concern that if this doesn't work so well, that reflects on them. And so they're afraid of the evaluation of that. They're afraid of the outcome of it. If it's not working, then why should I write up a report and show it to my boss? And so we deal with that a lot of different ways. One is that if it's not working, more than likely your client already knows that, the ultimate client, because the person who funds our program, if they're not seeing any impact of that program, they'll conclude it's not working. Right. Whether they share that with you or not, but it's their perception now. And so we've got a huge unhealthy perception of learning from inside the organization. So sometimes it's perceived as disruptive. You're taking people away from their work, and they come back and they don't do anything, and so you just disrupted my group. Right. So we've got to change that, obviously. So the key is, if you're working with the interim client, say, this is some data that this person would like to see, maybe. The person who's giving the funding, or if it's for manufacturing, is someone's head of manufacturing. If marketing is someone's head of marketing, or logistics. There's got to be someone there who cares that this actually works. Yeah, and they want to see that data. Right. And they often say, well, they never asked for it previously. Well, the reason we go to those people a lot, and we say, and they want to see this data. And we said, why haven't you asked for it? And they said, we don't think they can do it. If they could do it, they'd be doing it. Right. So they'd already shown you this. Right. So we think they don't know how to do it, and then we don't want to put them in a position of doing something they can't do. But they get to a point where they decide, we got to see it. And that's when they often ask for it. So they often suggest it sometimes. Maybe we should look at some other data. So one of the worst things you can do is to wait for that ultimate funder to ask you for it.
Yeah.
I think we talked about that. And that's, so we've got to get our...
So you're trying to get ahead. Your whole thing is we're trying to get ahead of the ultimate funder, the ultimate client asking for us. Because by the time they ask for it, it's almost like they are really looking for a reason to keep you, right? To keep funding you as a department, as a group, because they've like given you chances in essence in their mind, and they're like, I need you to prove your value to me. We want to get ahead of that. And the other thing I really love what you're saying is that person who keeps asking for usage and reaction and butts and seats and all of that, they're an interim client. I love how you're making that distinction, because that interim client, maybe the problem is that they're not really, whatever their mindset is or whatever their priorities are, they're not really caring about the business impact. And you want to talk to the people who care about the business impact. Those are the people that are going to keep you in business.
Exactly.
I love that. So if you're talking to the interim client, maybe you need to be talking to a different stakeholder, a stakeholder above that, or try to get
if you can easily get that access. If not, what we'd like to do is raise the question: what would Sheila think? What would Frank, the person? What do you think she'd like to see out of this?
I love that.
Yeah, and so
you're not overstepping them, but you're trying to bring to their awareness that, hey, what about your stakeholders? What might they care about? What might they be interested in?
And if you feel comfortable, say, why don't we sit down with Sheila and as we go into this project and just see if there's some measure of success that she would like to have.
And we just add that in. It's a both and, right? You get what you're looking for, and your stakeholders, by the way, might get what they're looking for too. That's brilliant. I love that. That's a great way to do it.
Also, to diffuse your interim client, say, if this doesn't work, it's probably not the content that's the problem. It's something that didn't happen on the job. And we can design to overcome that. So, but we won't know until we start measuring there on the job and seeing what's working and what's not working. So if you got a negative ROI, it's probably because it wasn't supported very well. Or maybe we didn't design well enough for it to be used on the job and have that impact.
Right. So to me, if I saw that something wasn't making an impact, I would say it's probably because we didn't choose the right learning assets. We weren't in the right places where people needed it, when they need it, their context, all those things. That makes me think, have you come across, because knowing what you know about our model, have you come across measuring collective impact of learning assets versus the impact a course or a video or an e-learning made on the end goal?
Yes, we say, each learning asset, you have to decide, do I want to know how well that's working? And I want to measure reaction and learning. What was their reaction to that asset? What did they learn from that? So you want to know if those things are working, because if it's not working, then sometimes an asset is large enough that causes action. You've taught them to do something just from that asset. Sometimes a learning asset is just knowledge, something you need to know, but sometimes it's helping you do something. Then you might make a decision to connect that to that learning asset. Say, what have you actually done as a result of that? Pushing it up to level 3. But most of the time, we're looking at all the assets together in this project aimed at some big measure here. And then we see how things have helped that.
So how do you do that? Like and Lisa and I have gone back and forth a lot on thinking through this. Like, do you add together, do you measure each individual asset as best as you can, say the level 3s, if you can push to that, and then try to do some kind of funky adding that up to make a collective impact? Do you step back from all of that, just define, let's call them big picture ROI metrics, so kind of overarching objectives, and just rather than measuring each individual's asset impact on that, just have a baseline and see if the overall ROI's moved, and kind of draw a conclusion that, well, we've put these things into place, And so maybe that's making the impact. Like, how do you think about, what's your like equation? This is the engineer in me. What's your equation for collective impact?
It's easy. You'll love this. So we put it all together, and we're looking at that impact we drive. You could look at level 3, behavior, and then you could look at impact. Let's go with impact.
Okay.
So you've got an impact. So now impact came from all of the learning assets coming together. Now that we've got the success, we come back and ask, tell us the extent to which these assets contributed to that. And let's actually divide it into a percent. You know, what percent of your success do you think goes to this asset, this asset, this asset? Together, they produce this. So we call it isolating the effects of our program, but we do it in 2 stages. One is that you've got the learning assets working for your total project. That's improved something like productivity or quality. Now you want to separate that from something else out there working on productivity. That's isolating it down to my entire project. Then we call this a 2-stage isolation. Then you take what's left. If you say, okay, this much productivity, this much goes to the learning total. Now, given that, let's sort it out to the learning assets. So you can see which asset is contributing most to it. It's not that difficult, and the people don't mind telling you because they know it better than anything because it was them who learned that or used it or not.
Right.
Yeah, they're credible. We require that we collecting data, we're going to always go to the most credible source. So that person's credible. And we adjust for the error of the estimate. I think you saw that in our work group.
I love that because you're starting with the end in mind. So like if your end result is productivity that you're looking for, you start with that and you say, hey, have we moved the needle on productivity between say year 1 and year 2? Okay, now if there's these different initiatives we've done, maybe it's learning, but maybe it's manager, right? Like manager and work plan management. And then you're asking the users, the learners, the employees, well, what difference did work plan management make versus learning? So I'm just translating this back to make sure I follow. And you might say a percentage attributed to work plan management. Maybe that's 80% of it. Yeah, my manager got better at divvying up my work plan, helping me say no to things, whatever. But 20% came from learning experiences I've done. So now you're saying, let's take that 20%, let's continue to reverse engineer this. Maybe you have read some of the articles that we have posted, maybe you had a coach help work with you on your time management, whatever. What did those contribute? And so I love it because it's not just, I think a lot of times we try to isolate the effects starting from the asset and then trying to work up to that goal of productivity. And I think that makes it very difficult because when you start with the asset, I think the question I see L&D trying to ask learners is, well, hey, how much did the video contribute to your productivity improvement? Now you're flipping it and you're saying, we know your productivity improved through all of these different things. So you're bringing them the menu, the buffet first. You're putting the buffet in their mind first and then asking them to parse that buffet out instead of saying start with the salad and tell me how much that filled you up and then asking, well, what about the meat? What about the dessert? Right? So I love that because you're kind of backing your way into the micro, starting from the macro versus trying to get people to think about the micro and then get up to the macro. I really love that a lot. You're right. I will love it. You're like, you'll love this, and you were right.
So it's an engineering approach here. So we've been doing that for years. When we look at a particular project that might have a coach involved, it might have a mentor involved, it might have an e-learning module, it may be some reference material they have to look at, or a portal that they can go to, or they can review videos that they've used. There's all kinds of things they can do. Then and usually we want to know how did they help or not.
Yeah.
And then we go after the fact and sort it out back, coming back to them.
Have you ever come across a project where you couldn't measure ROI or you couldn't, Yeah, I guess that's a question. Have you ever had a...
We can always measure ROI. It may be negative, or it may be zero, it may be
The
positive.
answer might be something we don't like.
Yeah.
But you've always been able to get to the measure.
See,
You've always been able to get to that impact or the ROI measure.
well, see, here's what happens a lot with soft skills. If they didn't think about connecting it to the business, they put the soft skills program in place, like a leadership program, and nothing in there ever was designed to connect it to a business measure. And then after it's over, they get the request saying, now that we've done all of it, can you show me the ROI? And we've been asked to go do it. And I'd say, okay, tell me about your design, tell me about your impact objectives, and they said, we didn't have any. We just had learning objectives. You know, was it pitched to them as something that would help them drive some KPIs in their business? No, that didn't come up. Okay, so I'm saying to them, before we go do the study, more than likely, the best we can have is some intangibles at the impact level, like maybe teamwork, collaboration, stress, or something like that, maybe job satisfaction. But they're measures that we cannot convert to money creditably, and so we in our system, we leave them as intangibles. So by definition, if you can't convert them to money, and that's all you got, that's a negative 100% ROI. That means zero benefits. You put it in the calculation, zero benefits minus cost divided by cost. That's minus 1 times 100, negative 100%.
So this is really interesting to me. So you're saying that if you never had a why, a business why in the first place, let me make sure I'm getting this. Are you saying that then you could never have an ROI from it?
I won't say that. We've seen some programs deliver that. And we saw one with OPM just recently. You've cut your chances of having a ROI positive. So you can still go down that path if you didn't plan it at all.
What if you accidentally made a positive difference? Do you know what I mean? Because I know what you're saying. Like we run in this all the time too, where it's like someone had a passion project, right? Yeah. They just came and they just said, I just feel like a problem in our company is X, whatever. Like right now, it's like remote team building. And they just want remote team building. They don't have any real clear connection, no clear strategy, no clear business metrics they want to tie back to. But then sometimes with no strategy, they still make a positive impact, right?
In spite of our efforts to not help them, they got there anyway.
They got there anyway.
Yes.
So in those cases, you're saying you might still get a positive ROI, even if they didn't intend to make a positive business difference.
Yes.
It was just sort of a random project.
Well, yes. So imagine if we go back to the scenario where we didn't have any plans to measure it at this level. Now we are. If we can try, and just what we do is let's think about some very important KPIs: productivity, quality, timeliness, maybe retention, safety. A few of those measures. And we ask him, tell us the extent to which this program has influenced this measure. And if they check one, like productivity, then we do a drop down and said, okay, can you define a productivity measure that actually improved? Can you define it? And it's sometimes there's a word, yes, okay. Now, how much did it actually change since you took the program? Now, what percent of this change actually goes to this program? And what is your confidence in that allocation? Now, there's a chance that you can still get some data following that process. With that, you're going out, you're seeing how it's connected, and if it's connected, you're dropping down with some questions there to get some data. But the odds are, if they hadn't thought about that, they won't be there. So because now you're also just also basing it off of their perception, their opinion of what happened. Yes.
Right, which ideally if you do this with more and more people, the larger volume of people you do this with, it can help kind of mitigate that bias of someone's own self-reflection and the errors that come with our own self-reflection of how much something made a difference. But But that's really interesting too.
So we had a project at OPM during the pandemic. That's Office of Personnel Management. They have a program with presidential fellows in the federal government, and it's people who have either a master's degree in a university. Maybe it's got some good work experience too. They really look high potential, and they get them through this Presidential Management Fellows program. They give them some rotation, some exposure, and they have very detailed leadership training. And they're assigned to an agency. But they take on a project. They go into the agency and try to change something with the help of the supervisor there. And they take on these projects and they bring some good change. See, that's a good design. But when they implement that, they didn't have any impact measures. It was just leadership competency. So they wanted to. They're getting some pressure because they want to raise the amount they're charging for that because the agencies pay for it, and the agency's saying we don't want to pay anymore for it. And so they said we better show them the value it's delivering. So what got us in the ROI was a need to show the value back to the agency. So we did the study, and because they did great projects and they had great support in their agencies, they did marvelous work, and it was a huge ROI. When say huge is 100% ROI, which is you got for every dollar invested, you got your money back plus another dollar. And although they didn't plan for it to be measured at the impact level.
That's great. So this kind of continues on the thread, and it's my last question for you today is, I get this a lot too, is how do people, if people didn't collect a baseline, do you ever recommend people somehow retroactively figure out a baseline? Or, what's your thoughts on baseline measures?
See, if you got a person in the program, ideally sets the KPI they want to measure, if they can. If it's lower level, it might be the boss that's for them. But most people can. So they've got a measure already there. So there's a baseline already set. If it's a measure that's already in the system, they're key performance indicators. So ideally, you want to start with that in mind. So when you...
But let's say it's a new KPI. Like, let's say they're doing something new, they've never done it before.
So that,
or it's something that they've been doing, but they've never tracked.
Yeah, that's okay.
But now it's emerged as an important KPI for the business. But it's in its infancy, right? Yeah. Or sometimes L&D will suggest this should be a KPI and that happens a lot with the LCD models. As people are coming up with their impact objectives or their strategic performance objectives, they're coming up with new metrics for the on-the-job behaviors. They're like, these are the on-the-job behaviors we want to see, but we've never measured those before. We just hear from managers that this is their pain point. This is what is really causing a barrier to the business, and this is what they want to solve for. So then they always come and ask us, they're like, but we don't have a baseline in this. How are we going to measure improvement after we deliver our learning cluster? And, I tell them, we'll start collecting your baseline now, but I'm also still wondering, is there a way to kind of retroactively, get more data about the past? Because you might develop your learning cluster in 3 months and roll it out, and now all you really have is a baseline from January to then, launching in March or April, and it just is hard to prove the impact or the difference.
Yeah, but if you're monitoring it now, so it's something new you hadn't done before, so you don't have a baseline. But if you're monitoring it now, and you're going to track some improvement now because now you're monitoring it. The key now is saying, I've got improvement. Can I claim all of that coming from this? And we say not necessarily, because if you say, we've got an empathy skill that we're developing. We didn't track that before, now we're doing it. In our survey, in our 360 feedback, for example. Well, they had some level of empathy before. It's just it wasn't monitored before. So when it shows you've got this much going on. If you look at nothing going on before, we don't know for sure where it was before because we didn't have a measure here. But let's assume that that performance that you have, what percent of that now goes to the training? Let's assume that some of it you would either you already knew, or you would have, through some trial and error, probably done some of it anyway. You got that skill that you want to sort out back to the program, even though you don't have a pre-post to compare it to. The fact is that you're measuring it now. You didn't measure it before. Let's assume nothing there compared to something is there. Let's do that delta.
Yeah, so here's what I'm hearing you say, and I think this is a really valuable point too, is that we tend to focus so much on the absolute numbers that we want, and what I'm hearing you say is, let's focus on the difference. Was there an improvement, and how much of that improvement would you assign to the learning asset versus what might have already been there, what feedback you might have just gotten on the job, or self-awareness, or whatever in this case. But I do think a lot of times, even in our clients, they're trying to focus on a particular numerical target, and that puts the attention away from, are we just making a difference? Are we making an improvement? And then how much is that improvement worth to us as a business? So the delta, measuring the deltas rather than the absolute numbers. That's brilliant. I love it. Well, Jack, I've really enjoyed this time with you. I really appreciate you coming by here. I don't know, any last words you want to add about the conversation?
Well, no, it's just getting people to go down this path, overcoming those barriers, and there's so many of them. It's just change for people. I want to go back to the point you made earlier. You've got some people who don't want to change this, yet the ultimate funder would like to do this, but the resistance is here. So this is why we want to bring in the leader of the function, the leader of the learning, and say, look, we got to do some things different here. We've got to drive business value in some key programs here. And it's really something we all have to be a part of. You can't measure your way to success. Just like in quality, you can't inspect your way to success. You've got to change the design. You've got to do the same thing here. And that's what you preach and teach all the time anyway. So our measurement system is something that's got to change as well. And we all have a role in making it work.
Absolutely.
Driving that result.
I love it because I think that's such a beautiful closing note, because I think one of the things with both of our methodologies and models, what it really does is it inspires people to be a little bit more fearless, because maybe normally they don't go talk to the big boss and they don't own their own possibility of creating their own vision for their own department, their own strategy. And that's really what we're coaching people to do is, hey, if you're getting stuck at this level, figure out what this level wants and go talk to them and own your own vision, own your own success, and tell them like, hey, this is the impact we're making. We want you to know that we aren't doing one and done anymore. We're trying to change on the job behavior. Who's interested in that in my company? Let me go talk to them. Right. And I think everyone should go be a little bit more fearless, a little bit more bold, right? Move away from that order taking, because it's not benefiting us. And I've seen that courage from people, and when I see it, it sounds like you've seen it with a lot of your clients too. What do you get? You get people making a difference. Yes. And that's what everyone really wants. So beautiful. Thank you so much, Jack. I love it.